Good morning. Welcome to another episode of Tea, Coffee, and Torah. I'm glad to have you with me. This morning I have my handy Yellowstone cup. One of the things I like to do when I travel, which isn't that often, is pick up a little mug from the places I've been, and you just remember the memories of the places that you've been. And sometime I'll tell you about that trip because it was a lot of fun and we made a lot of memories. This morning we are in Isaiah 66, and this has really become something that is a growing experience. It's definitely something that I've learned from, and I want to share what I have learned with you. So much of the time, what we learn and what we read in the Bible, we try to interpret it based on simply the biblical text, which is great. I mean, the biblical text, first of all, it has to make sense within context, but we really can't read and understand Scripture without understanding the historical background to which the prophets were speaking. I mean, we want to make the Bible relevant to you and I today, but the reality is, and the truth is, they weren't speaking to us. They were speaking to their people, 2,000 years ago or 2,500 years ago. So when we look at what they are saying, we really have to take the text in historical context. So I'm going to share with you, what I want to do is reiterate what we covered last time, and then we're going to get into Isaiah verse 1, because there's a lot of controversy over this verse. Some people see it referring to the temple in Jerusalem and saying that Yahweh never wanted a temple in Jerusalem. Other people have other ideas. So I want to kind of get into this and break it down. So the historical setting, the background to Isaiah 66 is that Israel has just been defeated, or rather Judah has been defeated. Sennacherib and Assyria have deported the northern kingdom. They've deported Samaria. The capital has fallen. And after this, the capital has fallen, King Hezekiah of Judah goes about to make tremendous reforms in the religious structure in Judah. And we're going to look at some of those reforms, not just today, but also in our next two classes. So Isaiah 66 begins, "Thus says Yahweh, the heavens is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. Where is the house that you build unto me, and where is the place of my rest?" So we're going to tackle this beginning today and again next class. Then we go into verse 2. "For all these things my hand has made, and those things have been, says Yahweh. But to this man I will look, even to him that is poor and of contrite spirit and trembles at my word." Now, there was likely a space between, or some indication of a break between verses 1 and 2 originally that has fallen out with various translations, because what we find is something that is very uncomfortable given the context of Torah, because Torah outlaws human sacrifice. It outlaws the sacrifice of unclean animals, especially things like dog and pig. So this next verse is definitely a trouble to any translator who is not familiar with the ancient historical setting. And this is what the verse states in verse 3. I'm going to read it in its original without the translator's added text, because it really puts it back into its original historical context without the words that and what translators have added is the as if. So when we take that out, we actually get the original context. "He that kills a bull, he that slays a man, he that sacrifices a lamb, he that cuts off a dog's neck, he that offers oblation with swine's blood, he that burns incense, he blesses an idol. Just as they have chosen their own ways and their abominations in which their soul delights, so I will choose their delusions and bring their fears upon them. Because when I called, none did answer. When I spoke, they did not hear. But they did evil before my eyes and chose what I did not delight in." So what you see here is you have verse 1 and verse 2 that kind of set everything up. Verse 2 refers to a specific man to whom Yahweh will look. Verse 3 and 4 talk about this pagan ritual. And as we saw in our last class, this specific pagan ritual is known as a cleansing from defeat ceremony. The order listed in Isaiah verse 3 is the exact same order that we find in Hittite rituals for when an army has been defeated and cleansing that army from defeat. So what do we find? We find that in both instances, both in Isaiah 2 as well as in the Hittite ceremony, it requires the slaying of a man, the sacrifice of a dog, of a lamb. And we also find that even down to, we know that other Hittite rituals offered swine's blood with their grain offering. And that's what that swine's blood is referring to in Isaiah 2. So Isaiah is actually referring to a Canaanite ritual. And translators wouldn't have known this. When the early King James Version and even the early JPS Tanakh were translated, you didn't have access to all of these cuneiform tablets from the Hittites and from other nations. Those have only been discovered in the last 150 years or so. So this is a knowledge they wouldn't have had. So they did the best that they could with the text. But now today, because we have access to these things, we can go back and restore the original meaning and come away with something that is a whole lot closer to what Isaiah was actually mentioning. So now we're going to go and look at verse 2. So when you look at verse 2, who is the man to whom Yahweh is going to look? And I don't know if you can hear it. I am competing a little bit with the crows. I do like having these discussions outside, so we'll do it as long as we can. But the crows are competing a little bit. So when Isaiah talks about the man to whom he will look, he's actually referring to King Hezekiah. Because King Hezekiah is the man who enacts all sorts of reforms. And because, again, we are not familiar with history and archaeology, we look at verse 1 as though it is a criticism of the temple in Jerusalem. And this is, let me reiterate this verse again. It says, "Thus says Yahweh, heaven is my throne and earth is my footstool. Where is the house that you will build unto me, and where is my rest?" When Hezekiah came to power, Israel had many high places. In many of these high places, Yahweh was worshipped just like other gods. And oftentimes the worship of Yahweh was combined with the worship of other gods. So this verse in context is not a criticism against the Jerusalem temple. Rather, it is a criticism of all the other temples, because Yahweh specifically asks, where is the house that you built unto me? It's like you have all these other houses that you worship me, but are those the ones that I have sanctioned? Are those the ones that I have set my name in and the place that I have set for me to be remembered and for me to be worshiped? And of course, the answer is no. Those were cultic sites that competed with the temple in Jerusalem. And I want to get into one temple in particular that competed with the Jerusalem temple. And that is the temple of Arad. And this would have been in southern Judah in the desert. And this temple actually was the same pattern almost as the temple in Jerusalem, except for the broad room right next to the Holy of Holies, where in Jerusalem it's lengthways and it's very, very long. In Arad, it's wide. So it follows more of the typical tradition for an Israelite 4-room house. So there were modifications made to it, but it had a Holy of Holies where it appears that perhaps a Torah would have been interred there. And it was definitely a cultic site because there were incense stands there. And they have also excavated, which we will discuss excavations in the next couple classes, but they have found jars that have, unto Yahweh, where it's dedicated specifically unto Yahweh. So this makes it very, very clear that this cultic site in Arad was being used as a high place to worship Yahweh. And it was competing with the Jerusalem temple. So let's go back a little bit to the dating of the temple in Arad, because it's very, very early. The site itself had been occupied by the Kenites during the Judges era, and it had always been used as a defense fortification as well as a cultic center. After the Kenites, it falls to the Israelites, and you find that during the latter portions of King Solomon's reign, that is when the site begins to be used as a cultic center. And it is very likely that you had not just the worship of Yahweh, you also had the worship of other gods side by side. And we're going to get into some evidence of that. But what I want to leave you with today, because I am trying to keep these under about 12 minutes, is just the idea that the temple in Jerusalem was not the only functioning cultic site, and it was not the only functioning cultic site in which the Levites were serving. So next time we're going to get into more of the temple at Arad, the Levites, what they did, as well as the historical context, because I encourage each of you, go read Isaiah 66. Look at the number of times Jerusalem is praised in this context. So my question to you is, you have verse 6, where Yahweh's voice is being heard not out of the temple of Arad, but out of this temple in Jerusalem. Is Yahweh criticizing the place in which his voice is coming out of this voice of judgment? Or is he criticizing the other high places? And these are going to be high places that we will see Hezekiah actually destroys during his reign. So join me next time, Friday morning, for another episode of Tea, Coffee, and Torah. And I have to confess, right now, coffee is really 11-0 on these mornings, especially as it gets colder. But we will dig in next time and get more to the historical context of Isaiah 66. Have a wonderful, fantastic day, and thank you for joining me.